Morning all, let's continue our look at Mir Sultan Khan, this time with the classic, most celebrated game that you will find on YouTube and in most annotations, was his encounter against José Raul Capablanca in 1930. Capablanca had been a world chess champion from 1921 to 27, considered one of the greatest players of all time, with exceptional endgame skill and speed of play, and due to his relatively simple style of play, he was nicknamed Human Chess Machine and often regarded as the most naturally talented chess player in history. Okay, but here is a game where two talents meet, and they're both of this positional and natural kind of polite style of chess, not going on for major like hack attacks but rather positional control. So let's see what happened in their Hastings encounter. So at the end of December 1930, going on to 1931, the Hastings tournament. Knight f3 was played by Mir Sultan Khan. Knight f6 by Capablanca, symmetrical for the moment. d4. Now b6. Okay. An early Queen's Bishop fianchetto. c4, and Capablanca continues. Bishop b7. Knight c3. e6, as though there's an interest in a kind of Nimza Indian type position. This is ruled out now by the move a3. But here Capablanca plays d5, so he's got control over that e4 square. He's temporarily hemmed in his bishop, and against this, well, the possibility perhaps of d takes c4 later, the pawns are fixed with c takes d5 now by Mir Sultan Khan. Now often if you play this, you're sometimes releasing the bishop on c8 on this diagonal, but the bishop's being committed to the Queen's Bishop fianchetto here, so it makes a little bit more sense. Perhaps black can consider knight takes d5, but Capablanca played e takes d5 here, slightly different plan that black might continue later with, say, c5, and try and use that central pressure and that control of the e4 square, reinforced by the pawn on d5. Bishop g5, pinning the knight. Bishop e7, unpinning. e3. So white's play so far, like other Mir Sultan Khan games in the opening, is very simple. Very polite positional control. Dark square grip is evident. Natural places for pieces, perhaps bishop here, rook here. Slight target on the c file, semi-open c file, but black's got this e file to play with, and maybe e4 can be made use of later. Black castles, and we see bishop d3. Now there's a known Capablanca freeing maneuver in analogous type positions. Well, this might be slightly different from those type positions, and this next move played by Capablanca would seem in some respects fairly logical, but on closer investigation that I've made in the last few days, new investigations from the previous video I made a few years back, I think this move carries some risk to black. The move is knight e4. The move is afforded by the bishop protecting d5 here, so bishop e7 is not like winning a pawn. d5 is supported, and that's what black wants, a kind of freeing maneuver and an exchange of dark squared bishops. That's what Capablanca wanted here perhaps, and with that he might even look forward to things like f5 later, and he'd try and contest the e5 square. Of course he doesn't want totally weak dark squares, so maybe knight d7, even f5 later. But the problem with this knight e4 is perhaps it's potentially weakening h7, and also it's a little bit of a tactical target for kind of a double attack here on e4 pressure and c7 tactically. It can be used to gain double attack, and remember h7's behind that, so potentially it's a little bit of a tactical liability. and black might not be keen to reinforce it that with f5, because the e5 square would be weakened. Sultan Khan's move here basically keeps the tension in the position and starts to raise some of these issues around h7 and c7 with regard to knight e4. His move is bishop f4, and in particular, of course, c7 and h7, that would be is already under pressure from the bishop, but a queen here is targeting these key points in the black position, as well as that knight on e4. So we start to sense that knight e4 is a little bit fragile, and you don't really want to reinforce it with f5 unless e5 can be contested. But the bishop is also helping for a dark square grip on e5 here. Okay, and these issues are raised here means that black has to play quite accurately now, and this next move might not be the most accurate move. In analysis I've done and not saved here from a few days back, I think black might have to try c5, but we'll check that out in the second pass. The reason for c5 would be to try and quickly get pressure on that c file to try and pin down the knight in the event of queen c2. But what we see here is already critical for who's going to get an advantage now. This knight is a tactical liability in effect, and this next move highlights all these issues that I've mentioned. So after knight bd7, which is more routine than c5, what we see here now is the move queen c2. So already, if the knight takes, white can even consider bishop takes h7. We'll check that in the second pass. There's a latent attack also on c7 with bishop and queen here. Okay, and now also there is another issue relating to c7 though. It's only protected by the queen, and we see Capablanca reinforcing the e4 knight now with the move f5, which as mentioned might be weakening e5 anyway in the dark squares in general. But this c7 issue is now tapped into with Sultan Khan's next move, and this has all really stemmed from this knight e4, this situation, which is slightly unpleasant. f5 is also weakening the e6 square, which makes this next move more effective than usually it would be. Often knights can be repulsed back, but here after knight b5, okay, we've got 3 pieces now on c7. The knight, okay, the issue on this diagonal has been parried, but c7 remains as a major issue now, believe it or not, because, for example, if c6, the knight can still slip into c7, and the rook moves, then we have knight e6, winning the exchange. So this is an issue. This really is an issue here, that white's semi-open c-file pressure is difficult to parry. A concession is actually needed, it seems here, in this position. On a6 you might think we could try and, after knight takes c7, play a pin. We'll check that out in the second pass, a6. But it might be the case that bishop takes c7, for example, is a nice move. But that's certainly something to check out. In the game, Capablanca uneasily played perhaps the move bishop d6, and it's not very nice to have to shield c7 to give up voluntarily the dark square bishop. You might think dynamically that, okay, if black recaptures with the pawn, as he does in the game now, at least he's controlling that sensitive e4 square, and there is still this aggressive looking knight on e4, and maybe black is now sharing this c-file. So you might think dynamically this is okay, but we do have now a trump card potentially for white, this dark square bishop in this position, but itself is a tactical liability potentially to black playing g5. So this next move actually prevents g5, it seems. That's the main intention, h4. So white having the bishops, both sides sharing the c-file, and this knight is seemingly aggressive, will mirror lose patience and take it off at some point, but wouldn't that give black dynamism? So it starts to be instructive. How is this position handled here? Well, it seems to have got something, perhaps a little bit controversially, because black's position visually seems aggressive at this moment. We see rook c8 and move queen b3. So tactically, some options have been taken away from black that he has to take with the f pawn on bishop e4's here, if white wants to play bishop e4. Okay, black plays queen e7. White's not really interested in taking on e4 here at the moment. He plays actually a very interesting move, not castling. Well, if he castles, well, h4 might be a liability anyway. And also tactically, knight d2 in any case. Castling's not even possible here because of knight d2. So the knight is actually making its presence felt, that white cannot even routinely castle in this position. Pardon me. Knight d2 is not on, it's protected by f3. But some of the points still remain that this pawn could be slightly weakened. Okay, white's next move is actually challenging this knight now with knight d2. It's reinforced, and in this position Mir doesn't mind playing knight takes e4, which seemingly gives black a little bit more dynamism potentially on the f file, but the f file is reinforced with the bishop on f4. So okay, we see f takes e4, bishop e2. So here again the bishop pair seems to give white a tangible positional advantage. d6 has to be kept protected. There might be potential for white, for example, playing queen b4 to try and further target that d6 pawn. Capablanca plays rook c6, and now a very interesting move to just undermine d5 now is possible. g4. So g5 will be undermining d5. It starts to be a little bit unpleasant. But the white king's still in the centre. Leads back to think that rook fc8 might be interesting here. Okay, so are these checks, the check on c1, is that check actually dangerous? g5 is played, welcoming the check here. The thing is, white controls c2 with the queen, so if the king comes here, both rooks are connected, and the queen can take on c2, so it's not a mating there or anything. But also the queen can potentially take on d5 now after knight e8. That was rejected. Taking on d5 with check and maybe stepping back. So it looks like it has become a difficult position for black. But in this position, bishop g4 leaves black in an even more uncomfortable state. Does he really want to be forced to move this rook to c7 or even away from the c file when d5 could be dropping here and the queen could return? It doesn't look that pleasant. So Capablanca did offer two rooks now for the queen, which in some positions here, in some positions you might expect the person with the queen to have a lot of chances. It really depends on the nature of the position, how well the rooks can coordinate and keep the activities of the opponent's queen to a minimum. So queen takes c2, we have this situation where white theoretically has the material advantage now. And the entrance routes into white's position are few and far between. It just seems that c file at the moment, and if white can contest that c file, control that c file, black's going to have a hard time. We see check, and now queen c4. The queen's making a nuisance of herself. Queen d3 looks threatened, for example. That's parried, it seems. Bishop e2. Queen b3, okay. That pawn is now protected. And the queen's run out of immediate other things to do. Okay, and this knight is kind of stuck there, because otherwise d6 will drop. So it can't get in the game. The bishop's kind of stuck behind the pawns here quite passively. So it's white that can do a bit of running to improve the position, it seems. King f7, and the rooks can start to celebrate this c file a little bit. And we see in this position the move b4, because queen a4 might have been implying that bishop a6 might have been of some interest, but now at least white with b4 has also got the option of b5 if that is a problem, which it might not be. Queen d7. Okay, the queen just humbly retreats back, and now the rooks are coordinating, it seems, on the c file. But now, can the queen make herself a nuisance on the king side with these pawns, potentially h4 being a little bit loose? Well, in this position actually, Capablanca plays a6. And you might think, why? Well, maybe one reason is that if white plays the move b5, that really puts a seal on the whole queen side. With the move a6, then it's more difficult for white to play b5 here. So, okay, now we see rook g1, and the queen makes herself a nuisance again with queen a4, rook gc1, queen d7, a little bit waiting, seeing what white will do. h5, king d8, and rook 1 to c2. So Mir is showing great patience. What is white's actual plan, you might ask here, and what is black's plan, apart from being a nuisance with the queen? Well, the queen continues to be a nuisance with queen h3, and the plan becomes apparent that white wants to slightly improve his position, and in doing so, well, to do so he's moving his king now to perhaps an arguably safer place. Queen h4, and it looks as though the f2 pawn is attacked, but here tactically this isn't such a major issue, it seems. White just plays king b2 anyway, and the point, say queen takes f2 was played here, I think the point is bishop g4, and the queen's almost running out of squares here. It's being actually in this position also, actually pardon me, in this position bishop takes a6 will be sufficient, just attacking the queen and the loose bishop here. That would be pretty nasty. So that pawn is immune in this particular position, it seems, so at least bishop a6. So queen h3, rook c1, queen h4, rook 3 to c2, and you might think, okay, is white making progress? Queen h3 again, a4, queen h4, king a3, queen h3, bishop g3. Now g5 is slightly looser with bishop g3, queen f5 hitting g5. That's protected again this way, bishop h4, as though g6 is now a major threat. That's prevented, g6 is prevented. And we see h6 as though the king side is being gradually closed up as well, with opportunities, with a fixed structure, locking black's pawns here. This knight has been run out of squares. Look at these squares. There's no squares for this poor knight on e8. That's something Magnus Carlsen in modern times has talked about in his games, where sometimes he's pleased that a knight has no moves. Okay, for the moment now, and also on the queen side we see the ceiling of the queen side with b5, a5. So what horrors await black here? Is it going to be something like rook c6, perhaps? Let's see. Bishop g3, queen f5, attacking the pawn is protected. Bishop f4, queen h3. So Capablanca is in a strange situation, which he might not have found in many of his games in his career, that he's only got his queen to play with here. But can white actually construct a plan? This knight's been totally ruled out of the game. The counterplay of the knight has been destroyed for the moment. The counterplay of the bishop's been destroyed. There's not even a hint of even a plan for bishop a6 now. It's all been locked up on both sides of the board. So quite a magnificent position in some respects. And all white does here is wait, it seems, again with king b2. And the only thing black can do to threaten is this queen g2 now. Now, is the f pawn actually attacked? Because there's no bishop a6 in this position. well, we see this being tested now. Okay, it's a little dramatic incident now with king b1. Is this really a problem, taking this pawn? Now, in this position, I think the bishop g4 resource is more relevant here. The queen in this position, okay, has got very limited squares to actually run to. Everything's protected apart from h4, but the queen in this position can be put in prison with rook g1 and about to be executed later with rook h2. And this is why I was distracted earlier with bishop g4, because actually it was this position when I first checked this game, and this queen trap. So you might wonder, that's the only threat that Capablanca has for a long time, this threat on f2. So it's interesting that this is the mechanism which I think would punish black, just getting the queen trapped. So it's just ignored, showing basically that white really controls the position for the moment. Black cannot do anything here. The pieces are all stuck, especially this knight, horrendously stuck on e8 for the moment. Queen h3, king a1, queen g2, king b2. What is Mir up to? Queen h3. Okay. Rook g1. Okay, the queen's still got that return diagonal. Or has she? Is there a threat now of bishop g4 putting the queen on that horrible h4 square in any case? And then maybe, if the queen's there, f3 and rook h2 might be on the cards to win that queen. And you might think, well, hold on a sec, the queen can stumble back, but then maybe bishop g4, and then white can think of doubling the rooks again and rook c8. It starts to look a little bit scary. So maybe this is why Capablanca didn't want this possibility of the queen going back in bishop g4. He plays bishop c8 to contest that diagonal, to make sure white's not going to dominate that diagonal. But the weakness of the last move here is that c6 is now available to a rook here, which would attack d6 and b6, and that's actually played here, rook c6. So things have already livened up considerably now. Queen h4, this trapping mechanism surely is not in this position, that the queen is actually now threatening the pawn. Well, white now shifts attention, forget about f2 for the moment, rook gc1, threatening the bishop. Bishop moves to g4, attacking e2, that moves, offering now f2. So this is another interesting tactical incident of the game. Can f2 really be taken here? It would seem the queen's still getting trapped in a ridiculous way. If queen takes f2, maybe the rook can just go here, so this bishop's still protected. Where would the queen go here? If it goes here, then maybe just rook h2 again. So this f2 is really showing immunity in this position to being captured, even here. So we see, okay, so bishop g4, we see bishop f1, queen h5. What a ridiculous place to put the queen. Maybe the idea now might be bishop d1, that's the threat to just attack a4, it seems, or bishop e2, just to try and get rid of the light square bishop. That seems to be the more relevant threat taken care of with the move rook e1. Okay, this looks like a long, protracted torture session for Capablanca. He's just playing with his queen for most of this game. Queen h1 now, what is the threat here? Could the threat be, well, it's a pin, bishop h3 could be the threat. We see now the rook being protected, so bishop h3 is not so bad. And white really is threatening to take on b6. So white has made big progress here. That invasion to the c6 square, surely it's going to result in material gain soon. Queen h5. And what's the threat here now? White actually doesn't take on b6. He just plays remarkably, you might think, the move king c3. king c3, queen h4 is played, not being tempted, for example, by bishop e2. Perhaps the idea of king c3 is that the king might be looking after e2 after. So say bishop e2, maybe king d2, maybe that's the idea, that the queen won't have access to the e2 square after, and black's left with that b6 dropping off, or d6 in some cases. But b6 would lead to that huge passed pawn. So maybe the king is taking an active role in defending e2 here, very calmly. Potentially queen h4. Okay, now finally a really dramatic moment now. Swapping of slight weaknesses, but this weakness means this pawn is a huge passed pawn. Mir plays bishop g3, potentially losing both his pawns here, but this is very significant to get this passed pawn going. Queen takes g5. Okay, and in this position the pawn isn't even taken immediately. We just see king d2 now. Okay, queen h5, and now finally it's taken. And there are some serious threats surely to black's king as well. The king evacuates, king e7, check, king e6, and now b6. This pawn is really, really dangerous. The knight, by taking that pawn, the knight's been given some liberation, knight f6, but nothing really to attack. These pawns are now in its way. You can't really get into the white position to attack white. Bishop b5 restricts the knight again, pawn knight being tortured again, can't go back to use the d7 square. Queen h3, and we see rook b8 here, and Capablanca's had enough of this game, and I think he's looking at things like perhaps rook f8 and just resigns it. He just feels the situation is hopeless. So on move 65 he resigned here. Capablanca wrote of Sultan Khan that he called him a genius, which is something he rarely said of anyone else. And I think part of this was he realised that when Sultan Khan first travelled to Europe, he had a rudimentary English and needed an interpreter, unable to read or write, never studied any books on the game apparently, and he never mastered openings. But even under these circumstances, he became one of the best players in the world in the middle game and the end game. So Capablanca admired Mir Sultan Khan. Let's check this final position just to show how dangerous this passed pawn is on b6. What can black do here? It's difficult to suggest things. If we play knight d7, that can just be taken. Check. Just take here. The threat now b7, b8. Looks difficult to parry with this queen over here stuck. In fact, black is completely helpless against that b pawn. The queen has just I mean, this is awkward configuration that the queen can't even use that diagonal now with the bishop stuck on g4. So knight d7 is entirely hopeless. If queen takes h6, let's just go with queening the pawn with rook a7 here. b7. Or we can just queen the pawn. We don't mind sacrificing a rook to do so, and that's enough. The pawn's queening, so up this position. White actual threat, if left alone, might be just okay. Rook bc7 and then b7. That's apparently if white was left alone. Okay. Yeah. Let's go back and just see the criticality, which I think is observed in this game about knight e4. Knight e4 is a very committal move here coming up. So h6, for example, c5 is liked by the engine, but knight e4 See a slightly subtle evaluation shift, with bishop f4 being the critical move, not simplifying with bishop e7, but bishop f4 being more critical. I'll just adjust this a little bit. So bishop f4 versus bishop e7. Bishop f4 is the move here, it seems, because this is a tactical liability. And the move here, knight d7, okay, queen c2. And already the engine's thinking dynamically about this knight to do something very clever. In fact, in this position, okay, instead of the very committal f5, what about rook e8? This is a trap that you can't really take here because of the bishop b4 check now, winning the queen. So that would be a resourceful way of defending e4 here actually. And if castles, does that leave the issue? Now let's say bishop d6 here, and this might not be as bad as the game. The knight has been reinforced without having to play f5. Which means the e6 square is not as weakened, which means knight b5 might not be as effective. So it's a completely different story is emerging here. In fact, I think black might be threatening bishop takes f4, or if we play knight b5 here, bishop takes f4, this would be okay. In fact, d6 is now protected by the knight here, so there's no problem here, it seems, at all with the knight b5 concept. But in this position, yeah, this way of reinforcing e4 did leave e6 vulnerable, making knight b5 more effective. If we consider knight takes c3 another tactical solution to this whole thing, giving up h7 might not be too terrible. If we can trap the bishop, win it there. But is it actually a dangerous position for black? It might be playable, this position, because black might be able to use G&H files. It might be playable. Okay, at least it looks better than the game. So in the game, what we saw is the move f5 is perhaps a little bit controversial here. Okay, knight b5. Now, black played bishop d6, which might be inferior to the more tactical forcing move g5. If we look at g5, bishop takes c7 or queen c7. This position is more dynamic for black. On bishop g3, okay, although white's won a pawn, black might have some counterplay going here. I was winning a pawn back, and possibly it's better than a game continuation. Giving up very committally 2 rooks for the queen is creating a material disadvantage. This sort of position, at least, well, black's got weaknesses. The e5 control is impressive, but black still looks to be in the game. In the game, we see knight b5 and we see bishop d6, which might be inferior then to g5. So knight takes d6, and we see white slightly technically on this depth. It looks good for white. h4, a little bit controversial perhaps. h4 actually. Maybe it wasn't even needed. Maybe white should just castle, just to avoid any weaknesses. More ideally, give the bishop a pigeonhole, and this would be pleasant for white. But in the game, okay, we see h4, rook c8, queen b3, queen e7. Okay, again, in this position it looks as though objectively that white's advantage seems minimal. Actually, maybe there is some compensation for that knight, which is aggressive. It is protected like this with both pawns, and it is a bit of a menace in some variations if white's not careful. So this move knight d2 is interesting. Just trying to swap it off. We saw knight df6 and it being taken. And black taken with the f pawn, bishop e2, rook c6. Objectively, is this actually a bad position for black? g4 seems a very aggressive move. Did Capablanca really just blunder here? He has got that c-file to double rooks on. Maybe it's not as bleak as we might be convinced to paint this picture here. If he just moves the rook back just to make sure he's not dropping d5. This sort of position, is it so bad for black? When it's creating a few weaknesses, it might not be that bad. With g6, knight g7 to f5 might be on the cards. And a5, and this queenside pressure is also pretty dangerous. So actually with a4, this looks as though this is uncomfortable now on this structure. If we went with queen d7, okay, white's got the advantage, it seems. I think this bishop is very useful here, giving solidity to white's kingside. So let's go back anyway. The move g4 was reacted to with rook fc8, and we saw g5, knight e8. Technically, it seems white can get away with queen takes d5 here, and just slip back. Is black's counterplay huge here with, say, rook c2? Probably not. h5 and h6, rook g1. Where is black's counterplay? How does white sort of position out? Maybe to play rook d2 is the threat now, or not. Okay, white's better, but in the game we saw a very committal idea coming up, which might not be the best. Instead of just moving the rook here, offering this pawn, king h8, offering that pawn, and might be a much better choice, it seems, because white has potentially created some weaknesses. But okay, with accurate play, white's still going to be better here. But that c-file possession is of particular interest to black here, surely. But white, yeah, might still be better. f3. This structure in the centre is being undermined. The two bishops give white security on the king side to balance out the weaknesses. That dark square bishop in particular adds a lot of solidity to white's position here. So, okay, we see the controversial move in this position, rook c1 being played. And this is leading to, I think we can argue, an advantage now, a clear advantage. Because the queen can't make such a nuisance of herself here if not supported by either aggressive pawns or the other pieces. d3 is the threat parried with bishop e2. Okay, and this advantage, you see, is slightly growing now. b4, is black really threatening bishop a6? Yes, that might be the key threat here, bishop a6, so that's ruled out with b4. Just to answer with b5 here. Okay, a6, was white actually threatening b5? That was mentioned just briefly there, as though b5 might be of interest to white. b5 here then is a potential threat. If giving black a null move, b5 would be of interest with h5, just squeezing on both sides of the board here. So the engine's enjoying this position. a4 h6, b5 h5. The engine's really enjoying the squeeze on both sides of the board, it seems. So a6. Okay, if white tries b5, maybe even, I don't know, maybe a5 instead of, no, a takes b might be best. So if we go for that, we can reinforce that. even so though, a4 here it's not really ideal for black, so that might even be possible, but rook g1 is played instead, which is liked as well. Very strong move here. Rook g1. What is the threat? Is the threat bishop g4 or g6? Interesting, because actually g6 might be threatening bishop h6 and g7 here, and this might be a tactic actually missed by Mir, because he might have just been thinking about bishop g4 here. If we look at queen a4, in fact the engine really likes this tactical idea of just breaking through immediately with g6. For example, okay, if h6, I think we just take here, g7, we've broken through on that king side and we're winning that bishop as well now. But black's not going to play so badly. Black would play, say, h5, you might think. Well, actually then we just take here, and again we've got a huge position, so forget h5. No, actually g6 is quite a powerful move, it seems, in this particular moment. If takes, well, the knight is seemingly liberated, at least with the f6 square, but white is gaining pressure on g7. Can white use that? g5, let's say king f7, bishop h5, bishop d1 attacking the queen, bishop e2, gaining a bit of time there. So what would white's intention be here? Just go for rook e7. And the threat? Black is really tied down here. Let's give an example. Attack the queen. a4, and the bishop's loose. So it's just a way of winning material with that rook on the 7th here. So that kind of break with g6 is interesting. So, it's not in the very simple style which was used to win this game, the move g6 here. It requires a lot of calculation, and intuitively we want to just keep the knight out of the game, out of the f6 square if possible. So without too much fireworks in this game, black wasn't given much to do. So here is mentioned queen takes f2. I think just bishop takes a6 in this position. So the queen's not got much to do here. We see a4 putting the c side eventually, prompting g6 here. If anything else, if king d7, for example, that's annoying for this diagonal here. So rook g1 now threatens bishop g4, and that's actually crushing here. This move is crushing in this position. So bishop h4. It seems Kappa had to play g6, only move. So his position at move 43 was definitely getting worse with g6. So we have the king side completely sealed up, the knight completely stuck now on e8. Okay, and now the queen side completely being sealed up. So we'll have a remarkable position where Capablanca has been given no counterplay whatsoever. Okay, and here, as mentioned, queen takes f2 leads to the queen just being trapped with bishop g4. It's only got queen h4 here, and then the trap is closed with rook g1, protecting g4, giving time for rook h2. That's why it's threat now, rook h2. So the pawn cannot be taken there. So queen's just pointlessly doing nothing for the moment. What was forced in this position? This further concession to allow rook c6. White is threatening bishop g4, and if the queen stumbled back, you might ask, bishop g4 anyway, and now in this position, anything spectacular? I don't know why rook e1 is being mentioned here. It seems to do absolutely nothing. Let's go with rook gc1, as though rook c8 might be threatened. Queen f8. Check. Let's go brutally in. and rook b8 just to win b6. That seems positive, a positive plan. Okay, why can't the pawn just be taken? I don't know why this wouldn't be such a big deal to just take the pawn there. That looks convincing. Maybe this is interesting because King f8. There's something horrible going on here on King f8 in this position. Bishop takes d6 check, for example. So I think the engine's keen on torturing, just like Mir Sultan Khan, with strange king moves here in this type of position, instead of going for the material. That's very interesting as well. Is black in a kind of zugzwang here after king b3 rather than taking the pawn? So as we saw from one of my over the board games recently, a good idea to try and destroy counterplay rather than just nicking a pawn. So here this pin is just horrendous, and can it be exploited? Just bishop takes d6 will do. Pardon me, bishop takes d6 there. So this might explain this concession that Capablanca didn't want white controlling this diagonal after queen d7. If he plays queen d7, we see this situation where rook c8 might really be on the cards here. In both cases, rook c8 check leaves black in a kind of zugzwang position. So this is a further concession to black's position, bishop c8 and then rook c6. So these tiny concessions all stack up. Now here, taking on f2, well, bishop's attacked, can't do that. Bishop f1, queen h5. Okay, is black really actually even threatening anything? Bishop e2 might be a mold threat, so that's protected. And now king c3 is the solution here. So let's see, bishop e2 as mentioned. Is this really the idea to play king d2? Because this is quite ingenious stuff to keep control of key squares. Bishop takes, rook takes, just keeping control of the key square e2. So having the cake and eat it without the counterplay of queen e2. The king's actually stopping black's counterplay as well. So that's part of the genius of this game, which might be overlooked. That white is keeping control systematically of any nuisance squares. He's completely dominated this knight, and he's making sure this queen has nothing of interest to do or consequence to do with the move king c3. So bishop g3 though, finally offering something concrete. Bishop g3, that pawn as a pawn sack for b6. But king d2 really rubs it in as well. It's just going to take b6 in at take b6 at leisure, which he does here. So we've got this horrendous passed pawn. Queen's going to have to work hard. It's impossible to do something about the pawn now. King e7 was played in the game. If the queen tries to flee that, maybe the king's safety is an issue. Rook a6 or the passed pawn. Just leave the king where it is. Let's say queen d7 here. King safety might be an issue. Bishop h4 as well. The king's not in the nicest of places here. That has to lose the knight or something. Ouch. So that might explain why Capablanca's keen also to get his king out first. So check. Relentlessly moving. It looks hopeless. It looks as though bc7 and b7, rook bc7 b7 is good as well. So rook b8. It's just gone. Yes. So what we see here behind the scenes is complete control of the position. The knight was dominated for most of the game on e8. The queen wasn't given much to do, and when it did, it would be heavily punished. the king was making some remarkably profound moves just to control the e2 square, going back and forwards and back and forwards. It must have been a total, real torture for Capablanca this game, positionally. Not being given any counterplay after. The idea might seem good to give up 2 rooks for the queen, but wow, the counterplay, the systematic counterplay removal was extremely impressive. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.